You war with anybody. We Bloodstones. We rolling the east side, homie.
Welcome to Boyz in the Hood TV. Today we tapping in the streets of LA, and we're gonna be talking about the Bloodstone villains versus the Pueblo Bishop Bloods and many other rival Crip sets. Now the Bloodstone villains are a predominantly African-American street gang from South LA in a section called the Low Bottoms. They started back out in the 1970s, grew to be one of the most dangerous blood sets in the area. Their hood stretches from 50th Street to Slauson by Hooper Avenue. Now the Bloodstone villains consist of three different cliques: the 5 Deuce, the 5-7, and the 5-6. Bloodstones are clicked up with the Mad Swans, the Rolling 20 Bloods, and other hoods. Now some of their biggest rivals is the 5 Trey Avalon Gangster Crips, the 5-9 East Coast Crips, the 4-Pack Crips, and one of their biggest bitter rivals, the Pueblo Bishop Bloods. Now back in the 70s, OG villain from 57 named Michael Bowie came up with the name Bloodstone Villains. Now by the time the 80s hit, we would see the start of a war between the Bloodstone villains and different rival Crip sets.
Jesse James was the first villain that got killed on a 100% gangbang.
Who got Jesse James?
Do some photos. Photos.
It was a devastating hit. He was a real homie.
Just a few years after this situation, we would see the deadly war between the 5-9 East Coast Crips and the villains. On January 23rd, 1986, a well-known 5-9 East Coast Crip named Anthony Hunter, aka T-Tiger, standing outside of a liquor store on 56th Street and Compton Avenue with other 5-9 members, when suddenly the Bloodstone villains rolled up. Words were exchanged, and the Bloodstone member pulled out a gat and started shooting. Tiger was hit in the chest, and he would die at the scene. Now, a year prior to this shooting, Tiger, a 5-9 East Coast Crip, was arrested for shooting 5 people on the 55th block in Bloodstone Hood, but he was released due to lack of evidence. So authorities believe that this may be payback for that shooting. Now, just 2 years later, 5-9 East Coast Crip would be seeking revenge. On March 27, 1988, at around 11 p.m., Bloodstone member by the name of Donald Hayes, aka Don Capone, along with his girlfriend, Leslie Gray, stood outside in the front yard just talking when 2 Bloodstone villains would roll up, Wayman Jackson and John Smith, and they would ask Capone if he had any money to spare. Now afterwards, Smith and Jackson would head back to the car when a white Fleetwood Cadillac would pull up. Inside that car was 5-9 East Coast Crip member by the name of Cato Loke. Cato Loke would roll his window down and start shooting at Smith and Jackson. Immediately, Capone hopped into his car and drove down 57th Street in the direction of Compton Boulevard. As he reached the stop sign, Cato of 5-9 pulled up and started shooting into Capone's car. Capone hit on the gas, but as he drove down the street, he was hit directly in the forehead, instantly killing him, and his car would then crash into a nearby apartment complex gate, and he would die at the scene. Later, Andrew Woods, aka Cato Loke, will eventually be identified and arrested for Capone's murder, and by 1991, he will be found guilty of second-degree murder. Now, the very same year that Cato of 5-9 was convicted, the Bloodstones will have some internal beef while also clashing with the 4 Trey Gangster Crips. On August 10th of 1991, Bloodstone villains, including a man named Eric Belton, will ride down 56th Street looking for John Smith, another member of Bloodstone. The word on the street was that Smith was not well liked by everybody from the set, due to him having bad business dealings and ripping people off when it came to drug deals. Belton would spot Smith sitting in his car talking to a man named Cedric and another man named Rock and a few other people. Belton and the 2 other Bloodstone members in the car would immediately pull up next to Smith's car and start shooting. Smith was hit multiple times in the hell of gunfire, and he would die from his wounds. And immediately Belton and the other Bloodstone members would drive off. Just 3 days later, on August 13th, Bloodstone member Belton and others would drive through 4 Trey Gangsters Hood on East 43rd Street when they spotted a man by the name of Sean Mitchell and Hasim Hassan outside shooting dice. The Bloodstone members would pull up near the curb, and Belton would lean out the window and start shooting at him. Mitchell would be hit multiple times, and he would die from his wounds. Hasim Hassan was not injured. It was later discovered that Sean Mitchell was not a gang member. When questioned by the police, Hassan would identify Belton as the shooter. Eventually, Belton was arrested and charged for the murder of John Smith and Sean Mitchell, and he was found guilty of both and will be sentenced to life in prison. Now, through the remainder of the 90s, the Bloodstone Village remained active in the streets with shootings, robberies, but when the 2000s hit, a war would break out with the Pueblo Bishop Bloods. On Christmas Eve of 2000, Mark Black, aka Do Dirty of Bloodstone, was on Long Beach Boulevard where he allegedly sold fake drugs to the Pueblo Bishop Bloods. A confrontation would go down, and he was basically tortured and beaten very badly and eventually shot and killed by the Bishops.
My homeboy Do Dirty getting killed, when the circumstances came out on how he got killed, they shouldn't have did the homie like that. I loved him and everything, but he was kind of wrong. This dude got shot 20-something times. Your body got dragged. You found with your body with your pants hanging off and all this old shit. What the fuck? Man, y'all can't do our homie like that.
Years later, the beef with the Bishop Bloods would heat up even more. On March 11, 2004, members of Five Deuce Bloodstone, Cleo Stanley, and DeMonte got word that the Bishop Bloods were at the Slauson Recreation Center on Compton Avenue. At around 6:30 p.m., Stanley and DeMonte saw a group of bishops standing in the park. They would hop out of the car wearing hoodies, and immediately they started shooting at the bishops. A known bishop member by the name of Mr. Shaw was fatally wounded, and he would die at the scene. Now, eventually, Stanley and DeMonte were both identified by witnesses at the scene as the shooters. As they went to trial, Stanley will be proven to be the shooter who killed Shaw, and he will be convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 60 years to life in prison. A few years later, on April 10th, 2005, at around 7 p.m., two Pueblo Bishop Bloods by the name of James Jackson and Michael Mitchell drove down the 5-6 block Bloodstone Villains hood. Standing outside was Shantae L., Shanae H., and Shantae's sister-in-law, along with a known family Swan member by the name of Dre Hewitt. As they stood talking, Dre went to take a piss when suddenly the Bishops would pull up and a man named Jackson would hop out the car and he would shoot Dre straight in the chest. The other Bishop Blood, named Mitchell, would then open fire on Shantae, Shanae, and the sister-in-law, and all three of the females will be shot, but they will survive. But the bullet that struck Dre in his chest was fatal, and he would die at the scene. But eventually, both Jackson and Mitchell were identified by witnesses and will be arrested, and they will be convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison. A few years after this murder, on May 27, 2007, a man named Nick Wilson, aka Type, was from a tagger group and a known Bloodstone affiliate. He would ride his bike down 48th Street when he saw a group of Hispanic males from a rival tagging group called Doe and the other group, EBK. The members of these tagging crew were Aaron Romero and Omar Barrera. As Wilson rode past, he laughed and made a hand gesture at Romero. Moments later, Wilson would pass the group once again, but this time when he passed, Romero and Omar would chase Wilson down the street. Romero would hop on his bike and ram into Wilson, knocking him off. They began to fight. Romero would pull out a knife and try to stab Wilson. But soon Wilson realized not only was he about to be stabbed, but he noticed more members from the tagging group was coming down the block. So he decided to run down Hooper Avenue to get away. When he reached 53rd Street, a man by the name of Darius Porter, aka Kojak, of the Bloodstone Villains would roll up, asking Wilson was he good, and Wilson replied back that he had just been jumped and jacked for his bike. Kojak then told Wilson to get in the truck and let's go get his bike back. When Kojak pulled down on 48th Street, Wilson, Kojak, and the other Bloodstone members hopped out of the truck and they started fighting with Aaron and the other members of the tagging crew. Now in the midst of the fight, Romero put out that same knife and this time he stabbed Kojak, and Kojak was bleeding. But moments later, Kojak will pull out a gun from his waistband and start shooting. The Doe taggers and the EBK members all started running. Romero was hit multiple times as he fell between the fence, and Omar was hit in his back as he collapsed on the ground. Afterwards, the Bloodstone Villains fled back in the truck, and Wilson got back on his bike. Omar would survive his wounds, but Romero would die from his. Now, this entire ordeal was caught on camera by a nearby business, from the start of it with the initial chase with Wilson and the taggers, and also the shooting moments later. About a month after this, Kojak of the Bloodstone Villains would be arrested for the shooting. He was eventually convicted for murder and 2 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to 122 years to life in prison. Now, about 3 years later, on May 30th, 2010, known Bloodstone member by the name of C.K. Bell was shot outside the Bottoms Up recording studio in the Bloodstone hood. It's believed to be somebody from 10 Line Gangster Crip that was the shooter. Bell would be hospitalized, but he survived the shooting. C.K. homie and fellow Blood member named Michael Andres, a.k.a. Chabo, was pissed off and wanted some get back. On June 17, 2010, Chabo of the Bloodstones rode down Wadsworth Avenue in the 10 Line Gangster Crip hood at around 10 p.m. He spotted a group of people talking, which included Cynthia Parker, who sat in her vehicle, which also had her young daughter in the back seat. Cynthia was talking to Wanda Boyd and a known 10 Line Gangster Crip member named Larry Scheide. Chabo then exited his vehicle, and when he noticed Scheide, he started shooting immediately. He then chased Scheide down the street, but Scheide was able to get away. So Chabo then turned back around and started to shoot at Boyd as she ran. Boyd would get away, but in the midst of the chaos, Cynthia Parker was struck with gunfire as she would collapse and go unconscious in her car. Her daughter, who was in the back seat, was not wounded, but Cynthia would later be pronounced dead as she was transported to the hospital. About a year later, in 2011, Chabo would be arrested after being ID'd by multiple people. During his trial, the prosecution would play a video that took place years long before this shooting, but they wanted to show the jury how Chabo bragged about not doing drive-bys, but doing walk-bys, as he liked to get up and close and personal to his victims.
I don't do no drive-bys, blood. I don't believe in that shit. I walk up on my motherfucking enemy, blood. Once I'm homeless, I got it. I'll tell you how, I just be shooting, just to be shooting. But I know I'm gonna hit that trap.
Eventually, Chabo will be convicted and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Now, this ongoing war with the Bishops and the villains was far from over. But as always, as I talk about in my videos, there are always casualties of war, and most of the time, it's the innocents who are the casualties. On May 23rd, 2011, Bloodstone member Kenneth Corbin and a man named Michael Smith were walking down 55th Street and they sat when 2 Pueblo Bishop Bloods, Davion McClellan, and another man rode on their bikes and yelled out "Suwu." As Corbin and Smith turned around, Davion immediately started shooting at him. He would miss shooting both Smith and Corbin, but the bullets would then go through a backyard, hitting 1-year-old Joshua Montez and his great-uncle, Jose Fat Conchales. Both Conchales and Montez were fatally wounded with gunshot wounds to the head. They would die later at the hospital. Davion of the Bishop Bloods will be arrested, and in May of 2014, he will be convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Now, years later, LA will be a witness to a brutal massacre at a local bowling alley.
3 people are dead after a shooting at a bowling alley in Los Angeles last night. 3 people dead following a shooting in California, that is. It was in Torrance, and police in Torrance say it happened shortly before midnight, local time. According to witnesses, gunfire erupted after a fight inside the bowling alley, and police say they arrived to find multiple people with gunshot wounds. 3 people were pronounced dead at the scene. 4 others were injured.
On January 5th, 2019, people were gathered at the gay bowling alley. In attendance were members of 4-Pack Crips, which is a collection of sets like the 4 Deuce, the 4 Trays, and the 4 8s. Members of the 4 8 were Aston Edwards, a.k.a. Tank, Robert Meekins, a.k.a. Stro. Also in attendance was a Hats Gang Watts Crip named Mike Rafford, a.k.a. J-Bone. There was also a rival set in attendance at this bowling alley, and that was the Bloodstone Villains, which included OG Reginald Wallace, a.k.a. Lil Sir. Now, Lil Sir is a well-respected member that's been putting in the work on the set for years. Now, because these 2 hoods are rivals, it was only a matter of time before things took a turn for the worse. At around 11:54 p.m., a fight broke out with a group of women, which included Rayford's girlfriend of the Hat Gang Watts Crips. Rayford saw the fight happening with his girlfriend. He immediately ran to it and tried to break it up, but he was pushed back by some dudes standing around. And that push right there will create an even bigger brawl where the men were now involved. Both Robert Meeks and Edwards tried to stop the brawl also, but out of nowhere, Bloodstone villain Wallace, a.k.a. Lil Sir, pulled out a strap and started shooting everybody. Multiple people would be hit, including Edwards, Meekins, and Rayford. Each one was fatally wounded by Wallace. Meekins was shot in the arm and chest, and Rayford was shot in the torso, and Edwards was also hit in the chest. All 3 men would die at the scene. 4 other individuals will be taken to the hospital and treated. After watching surveillance footage and being ID'd 2 days later, Wallace was arrested for the shooting, and eventually he was convicted of 3 counts of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to life without parole. I want to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.